And now we go into Metzora, which is like a continuation of that. It's the signs of the leper, as they call it. It's a person afflicted by this, malady. They're suffering, and they're in their state of impurity, and they're in this impurity because they said lashon hara. They said evil speech. So then eventually they have to go to the priest, and as we know that the priest is not really the person who really knows everything about this disease, so to speak, but he's the one that has the kindness. He's the one that blesses the people. And so when a person is really suffering, he's the best person to go to see about, to the spiritual thing, to see how to fix it. And so that's what happens. And I was looking at my son's coloring paper today, and it had these cute little pictures that he's coloring in of what the leprosy looks like on the houses. And I'm thinking, could you imagine going through your house and being like, that has leprosy. We're going to have to take out down that the roof has it, or whatever it is. And it was so obvious. Like on a person, we're thinking of, I don't know, something that looks almost like an eczema or something. Right. But this is like very obvious. You would just see like a huge chunk of your house, pieces starting to look like, this leprosy. And that was it. And then eventually, but being alone, he is purified. So then it talks again about the woman and her purification through immersion in a mikvah. So I thought that this would be a great point to talk about, because we were mentioning it a little bit last week about the idea of impurity and about the woman. And so our sages explained that this impurity came as a result of God's curse after the sin of the tree of knowledge. So when I was thinking about this, like a curse, what does that mean? This is what I was hearing about. This is what it's saying. So this implies that the niddah state is not a natural phenomenon, but a result of sin. A sin that is so severe that it's considered the source of all subsequent sins, which is, from the tree of knowledge without permission. So in my mind, this sounds very backwards, forever doomed by punishment. It just seems that there must be something deeper that we're not understanding. So I'm breaking this down, the story, and I think it helps. Adam saw Chava, for the first time. He was afraid to be intimate with her because she shone so brightly with the Shekhinah of Hashem, with the female presence of God, that he was afraid to even touch her. Like, she was just so wow. And not like she's physically wow, because again, they didn't even understand any of that. The idea of physicality. Can you imagine? There's a man in the world and there's a woman in the world. There's no concept of attraction because there was no attraction. So there was no concept of attraction. Then what ends up happening, and first I want to say that one other time we see the situation where the face shone so brightly was with Moshe. So Moshe's face shone so brightly that people were afraid. They're like, he's wearing a veil. And every time we think of a veil, we think of a person's getting married. Permanently wore a veil after he came down from the mountain. So second time we see that there was such a powerful shine to one's face that the people were afraid. First it was Adam afraid of Chava, and then it was the people afraid of Moshe. She didn't wear a veil, but he was afraid to go near her because she was so shining with godly light. She wears a veil on her wedding day. She covers her hair for modesty. She covers up more so than a man. Even by law, a woman is not allowed to have certain things uncovered, but a man is. Because why? Because there's something very holy about a woman, and that also goes in a physical way. It's transmitted in a physical way, that when a man is going to be looking at a woman, there's certain things, if they're uncovered, they're going to stop and stare. For a man, it's not the same thing. It's less of the spirituality, and therefore, even in the physicality, it's going to be less as well. So this is what's going on with a woman. She is the feminine aspect of the Shekhinah. She is so holy, so amazing that he couldn't even be with her. Then all of a sudden, we see what happens. There's this punishment. They all of a sudden understand things. So there was a potential of sin. There never was the sin. And then all of a sudden there is this sin. So now you have free choice. Choice to see things in a certain way, to see it as good, to see it as bad, to see the whole picture. So this is what's really going on. And also we know this because after they ate from the tree, they knew that they did not have clothes on. Before that, they were just, like little kids partying around and they didn't even know anything, what was going on. Then all of a sudden, God's like, who told you that you're not wearing clothes? They're wearing the fig leaves. They look uncomfortable. This is really, not what they had in mind. They didn't know what to do because all of a sudden they were exposed to sin. They were exposed to having choice. Everything wasn't all incredible and great. Everything was, there's a lot of emotion that's filled with just choosing, a person to choose to do something wrong. And so we never looked at Chava before like this. And I don't say Eve because that's a secular way of saying it and it's a negative connotation. But before he sees her as someone who she's not approachable, and she's more than his equal. She's this guide. People say that she's the helpmate, but it's really translated like she's the guide. She's this mentor. He wanted to be like the animals and to have all of a sudden it's separate. That man and woman were once united and then they are separate. And she was just something that was so holy. All of a sudden they sinned and she lost that privilege of being so much higher up because she also did it to herself in the sense of she no longer looked at herself that way. And that was part of the punishment, that she no longer, sometimes we have to always say, oh, how do I look in this? Or how do I look in that? Why do women need to do that and men don't? Because it's something that is a natural thing for us. We're supposed to be divine. We're supposed to be perfect in a lot of ways. And a man is, in many ways, the more masculine aspect of God. So it's in a lower level. They don't have all of this. So they sin. And then she has something that really separates the couple, which is the temporary separation they have every month. Before this, she never had to experience childbirth. She never had to experience menstrual bleeds. I mean, we're saying she's lucky. Now she does. Now she has to feel pain and she has to be separate 2 weeks out of the month. And normally is the Holy of Holies, but normally is this connection where they say the cherubim, the angels were trying to face each other in God's Holy of Holies in the temple or in the Mishkan. All of a sudden, they have no choice, but they're not allowed to be together. And so it's a temporary thing until they are allowed together. And it affects the whole family dynamic. It's 2 weeks out of the month where you're having to be friends now. So, and if you're representing this godliness in the world, you could get to this incredible energy. I'm not talking about intimately. I'm talking about like in a certain level of connection that every month has to be cut. Of course, you're going to still have that. But every month, the way you're talking is different. The way you're looking at each other has to be different because there's no flirting. There's no holding hands for 2 weeks out of the month. So all of a sudden, you have no choice but to resume, okay, we're just pals again. It's that courtship. And so every single month you have this courtship and then eventually you have this marriage. And then as soon as that marriage is going great, boom, it's cut again and you have to start again. So before, and the only time actually that a woman doesn't have to do that is when she's expecting or after during menopause when she no longer has bleeds. I mean, you are unless you have a bleed. After you have a bleed and you go to mikvah, then if a person never has a bleed, so let's say she's expecting, she doesn't have that bleed, or maybe she might, depends on obviously on every couple, but there is that potential. And so then they could continue to work on this beautiful, marriage in that type of way. So there's the pros and the cons, of course, but this is something, if we think about it when it comes to spirituality, it's really tough, especially if a woman, when she is usually with her spouse, there's more confidence. Just like a man, when he's with his spouse, he has more confidence. There's more happiness. There's an upbeat rhythm in the house. And so, of course, you can still be pals and friends, but there's that separation. But when you're meant to be united, and then there was this sin, and there's exile, it's different. It's not the same. Because the one factor that the whole world is continuously searching for, what is the role of the woman? And I can tell you, it's very simple. If you look in the Torah, the role of the woman, she is the foundation of the house. And we know this because the feminine dimension is the Shekhinah. And where did God reside? In the Holy of Holies, in this temple, that's where he resided. As the feminine form. His masculine form was not there. It was obviously, there was different aspects of what a masculine form does. But the feminine form was always in the temple, in the Shekhinah, the Holy of Holies. And only certain times can the Kohen go into the Holy of Holies. So it's just this beautiful dynamic that when Mashiach comes, a woman is not going to have this bleeds anymore. She's not going to have the pain of childbirth. She's not going to have the questions of, what is my, where is my presence? Where does it belong? What am I supposed to be doing? It's going to be obvious. A woman is meant to be this leader and this guide, and will understand, we don't belong in the minyan because that's what helps the man. We belong to build our generation. Does that mean that we physically have to stay in the house the whole day? No. It's the idea. It's the idea of being the mainstay of the home, building the generations. And that also can be like that beautiful story I was telling about the Rebbe, how he took every single orphan and he would encourage them to eat. So of course, in this regard, let's say it was a woman who would go out and help different people in need. And that really is a feminine role, that role of nurturer, the role of noticing the details. So this is the real idea of a woman. And so there could be the negative form of people going, oh, women notice all these details and they're complaining. But really, what does it really mean? They're noticing what needs to be fixed. They're complaining. They need to voice their opinion to the person who needs to listen. That's why there won't be any stress or strife, because a lot of it is what is our role. But if we know what our role is, even if society didn't catch up yet to see what is the role of a woman, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact they're following what the Roman Empire did. Or you could say actually even before that, it was the Persian Empire. What the decree of Haman, what did he do? Before his decree on 127 countries, that's a lot of countries, he said, so it wasn't the woman, Vashti, she wasn't really in charge of King Ahasuerus. I don't know the secular name, but his son was Darius II, so I'm not sure what was his secular name, but she was killed, and the decree for, I guess you could say up until now in certain religions, not Judaism, but other religions, is a woman has to listen to the voice of her husband. That was a decree that was man-made. It was never meant to be, that's how it should be in the world. We see throughout the Bible how it really is with a woman. Listen to her voice, that's Sarah. You have to have consent with marriage, that was Rebecca. So you always see all the time it's the woman that is giving the voice. And the man chooses to listen to his guide or not to listen, But this is the whole idea, I think we can say about the nation. And then it talks about the idea of prohibition versus impurity. So during this time, the whole family suffers. They suffer in a sense of that there is this, whether a person keeps family purity or not, you have the idea of when a woman has her cycle, there's going to be different things she's going through, and the family feels it. God chose for her, and therefore the mainstay of the home, the foundation, is that it basically crumbles for that week. So every single month, your foundation of your home, your captain, your leader, your Queen of England she's a huge impact because it ruins their momentum. But Hashem chooses this way. Hashem chooses that this is the idea for the house, for the relationship, for the family, and for the nation of the Jewish people. For now, we don't have the Shekhinah of Hashem. Can you imagine going to the temple right now? Everyone's like, okay, all right, I'll see you at the Kotel. We're going to go, and there's going to be this incredible sacrifices, and everyone's going to be praying. It's going to be gorgeous songs and dancing, and everyone goes there. Everyone wants to be a part of it. But instead, we're like, we think, oh yeah, the temple was destroyed. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves. And that's a big deal because we're in exile. And so the woman represents that in every single house. That for that 1 week, it's like there's just exile. So the question is about prohibition. Is it a prohibition? Or, and the sages, of course, want to go all logical with this. And again, I say that's nice that they want to use a logical approach. But when it comes to a woman, there's always this emotion and this deeper thinking, using our emotion. But for the rabbis, they say, is it a prohibition? Or is it just in the laws of impurity? And eventually they come to the point, and they bring actually to prohibition that it's a command that you're not allowed to do. So you're not allowed to be with your spouse during that time, rather than just saying, okay, she's impure, so you're not allowed to be with her because of that. So there's a difference. So which is it? The more lenient view is followed. And they say, so it's even worse to be considered just that it really comes from impurity, but rather Rashi's grandson, the Tosfos, says that it is more about that she's coming from the state of prohibition. That the Tosfos answers that the leniency is granted only with regard to relations between a woman and her husband. And this indicates that laws governing those relations are matters involving prohibitions and not impurity. So, and that is actually in a better way, because we're going to the more lenient way, that it's just a prohibition rather than she is impure during this time, because the laws of bleeding in the book of Leviticus explain that this is what causes impure, and then you have to separate that during that time, and it explains all the laws, and then it says count for me an extra week. So we see also, and this has really nothing to do with the Jewish woman, but we see previous generations that there was 2 beds. So 1 week out of the month, and we even see that there was this rabbi's daughter that was kidnapped many generations ago. One of the in the Talmud, one of the daughters of this great Talmudist, his daughter was kidnapped and brought to a house that was obviously for girls, and they were forced. And so this other great rabbi wanted to rescue her, but he says, I'm only going to rescue her if miraculously she was not defiled. So he goes and he pretends to be an officer, and he's knocking on the door, and she says, even you who could come to such a house, to such a place, knows that you don't touch a woman if she's in her menstrual time. And I realized from this story that even back then, the nations of the world kept to this. That the law, that the week of one's, menstrual cycle, they didn't even touch. And that's why they always had the 2 beds. The idea in this country, and now that it becomes in much more other countries, it's a newer thing. So that's why Hashem says, count for me an extra week. That's when we do the extra added 7 days. So it's just something else I wanted to point it out. But then again, the prohibition versus just keeping its laws of impurity makes it a lighter, I guess you could say a lighter sentence, and it's not as extreme. Bring one more point, because they always want to explain about trying to always make it easier for the couple, easier for the Jewish woman, easier for her husband, regardless what people say. Oh, they say rabbis don't have our back, but they do. They really do. And I mean, you see this throughout the time. So there is this verse that says, and she shall count 7 days. These are the seven extra days that our sages comment by herself. That she alone is the witness. That God is, expects her, trusts her to be her own witness, to take the cloth and to use that cloth as an examination. If this is the witness, this is going to tell if the person is pure or not when they're ready to go before they go to the immersion. If there is the wrong color on the cloth, then she has to obviously wait and to try to count. So they say that this supports the argument that the prohibition is against sexual relations with Anita. This involves prohibition, not impurity. So they're trying to make it an easier way by saying, yes, it is an impurity. She's impure. We know that she's impure, but they say the laws of impurity, we're not going to that extreme. We're going to the idea that it's a prohibition. It's against the Torah to do so, but it's a lesser form of strictness as just the laws of impurity. So I think that's something that the sages decided, starting with the great Tosfos, who's the great Rashi's grandsons, who are trying to explain to us what is really going on. They say that this actually brings out the whole idea of the Jewish people as well. That when we are in exile, it's like the woman and her husband. When we're permitted to each other, there's this incredible energy there when God and the Jewish people are united, and then we have the temple, or when we're in shul in our mini temple, there's this godly energy that surrounds us. But when we're not at that point allowed to be together, it's felt in the family dynamic, even if we don't feel it. So again, it's a very special mitzvah. I think it's a very difficult mitzvah for the whole family. But on the other hand, it's something we don't understand. The laws of impurity, we don't understand this type of a mitzvah. But I can tell you from experience, there's plenty of blessings that are given, and it helps the marriage. Because when you're in this state of, exile, and we do look at each other as physical human beings, and there is this chemistry, and for 2 weeks you're like, okay, the chemistry is cut off for 2 weeks, and you have no choice but to use other expressions, other forms of communication. All of a sudden, it's a different story. Made it like Eve for evil, and I couldn't believe it when that's something that has been a known thing in the secular, that Eve is for like evil, that she's bad, that she represents sin. Whenever you think about the woman who sinned, who's the woman that sinned? Oh, it was Eve. She's like this horrible woman. And the real truth is she wasn't. She was the most holiest of women, carrying all of the feminine souls of her generation. And Adam carried all of the masculine souls of his generation. So they were equal in every way, but she was more spiritual than he was, to the extent that he was afraid to be intimate with her. Because but they don't mention that. They say Eve, it's like she was just horrible, that she's like this regular woman that was completely, I guess, not thinking straight, did everything wrong, and dragged the man down with her. I mean, that's how people view it, and it's not necessarily true. There was a lot going on that we don't see. Here she was, this very pure person that didn't hear, don't touch the tree. Adam added that, don't touch a tree, and if you touch a tree, you're going to die. Well, whatever. I mean, she's thinking, oh my gosh, I touched the tree. And then, so she's like this innocent, they're like children. They're so innocent and pure, and they never experience sin. And it's not how we view, I guess you could say, and no one should view anyone as bad. But to say that she's the evil of the world, it's not the drags to the generations that they always tell you, oh, women, sometimes women can be bad or whatever. And they make it out to be in a negative way, which I think really ruins. And then women also, we say, oh, you know how men are. And sometimes, men definitely have, you could say certain character traits. And women have certain character traits. But it doesn't mean that that's all of us. And that's also stemming from the Persian Empire. That was the law. And it extended even, I think, still to many parts of today, where who's in charge of the house? They say it's the man. But that never really was the case. As we know in the Torah, the woman's in charge of the house, but it's a family unit. So that also gets lost. It's hard because we don't see the whole picture. So we're in exile, so we only see like when men get called up to the Torah. We see the minyan. But what they don't really see is, really how it was with the Jewish woman, how she just really, I got a taste of this whole idea of my mother-in-law being Russian. You can see she's in charge in a good way. And I feel like there's a lot of Jewish women that are still like that, where you can kind of see that, that famous story of when the Frierdiker Rebbe was going to be arrested. And the soldiers came in quietly because they couldn't dare to wake up this Rebbe's mother. They knew that they were arresting this Rebbe. They knew they were arresting this great Rebbe. But they couldn't wake up his mother. So they quietly went to the room and they closed her door. And they were talking and whispering. And they were just, God forbid, if the father was still alive, they wouldn't care. The mother? And it shows you and eventually she wakes up and she's crying and they all walk out of the house. And they say, you have to come with us, but we don't want to bother your mother. We didn't mean to upset her. It's because this is the whole idea of the woman. She brings the energy. She brings the mood. She brings the moment. She raises the future. And it's like if a kid grew up in a bad neighborhood, there's like that famous story of that mother that ran out to this there was a situation where some kids were fighting against police, and this one mother runs out and she takes her frying pan and she smacks him on the head, and everyone's like, oh, how can you do that? What are you doing? And she's like, my kid is not going to be another casualty. He's not going to go to jail. He's going to come with me right now. And she drags him by the ear and drags him to her house, and sounds very dramatic. But this is, this mother didn't care what anything happened. It was beyond the rules, beyond the logic. It was just like all of this self-sacrifice for her family. And that doesn't get translated into the textbooks. It doesn't get translated into the culture if everything is supposed to be very, proper. World is based off, in my opinion at this point, more of a man's world, because society has allowed that to be. So this whole feminine dimension, this whole emotion in a positive way, gets lost. If your mother comes to work and hugs you, it's a tragedy. But why is that the case? Because we allow it to be the case. We see so many times, especially in the shtetls and the ghettos of the Jewish people, it was the mothers that ruled with an iron fist her house. Nothing got past her. If you speak to the rabbi, you understand clearly that his grandmother ruled with an iron fist. Anything was out of line, she knew. So, and this is how it is, but it doesn't get spoken about, and so therefore we believe the culture. The women have no rule, no place, but in some ways it's like she's this great manager. It's like when I'm giving my kids little jobs. So maybe someone's going to write a storybook about all the little jobs of my kids, but who watched them do their jobs? Who gave them, the cheerleader, the pat on the back? Good job, you can do it. Who made sure that everything was perfect and they had their water if they were tired, and whatever it is that goes on throughout their day of their school. It's the woman, and so I see this more and more each day. Before I'm married, I'm just, the regular girl of the world. And before you have kids, it's like, okay, you don't understand it. You understand the idea a little bit. But when you're the mother and it's like your child, and and once you have your kid and the husband comes in the room, everyone's looking at him like, you happen to be the child's parent too. But who's the main parent and who's going to be the main parent the whole life of the child? It's going to be. And that's a big deal, which gets lost, because each person is a world. Each person from that person is a whole dynasty for your family. And if they're raised wrong, then they're going to marry the wrong person. They're not going to have the right morals. They didn't make any mistakes. It's that mother, like with the frying pan, who says, "That's my son. Come with me." So I think that gets lost in translation. I think it's not written in the books because maybe it doesn't sound, in the right way. But that's how it was. That's how it is. And I think that has a big impact.